Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Social Flight Live. I'm Jeff Simon. We are so thrilled to be back after taking a couple weeks off for our trip, our No Magenta Line adventure. If you haven't already checked this out, be sure to go to Social Flight's YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and search for one word, Social Flight, and you will get to see our No Magenta Line adventure where we went with no destination and just wandered around and got into some crazy adventures with Jake, Ben, and I. It's definitely worth watching, and I'll just say it involved everything completely unplanned, from cliff diving to cave exploring to jumping out of airplanes. It never ended, and well, unfortunately it did end, and that's why we're here tonight. But fortunately we are here with Robert Scratch Mitchell tonight, and so we'll get started with him. And just before that, want to give you a couple other tips. First of all, if you are going to AirVenture, keep in mind that is now it's less than 2 weeks away before we'll be in Oshkosh, and hopefully some of you will be in Oshkosh as well. And we will be running Social Flight's Snag Some Swag Challenge, just as we did last year. We are coming with boxes and boxes of super, super cool things to give away. All you need to do is spot one of us, and as long as we still have something on us, we'll be sure to give it to you. So again, that's Social Flight's Snag Some Swag Challenge when you are out at AirVenture. We would love to meet you in person. In addition to that, we just gave away an Aspen E5 electronic flight instrument as part of our Fly to Win challenge, and we are now giving away a Lightspeed Zulu 3 headset. All you need to do is get the Social Flight app and just go fly. Even if you check in at just one airport during the prize period, you're entered to win. We just want as many people to get out there, fly, explore, and enjoy. And of course, the whole purpose of SocialFlight.com and the Social Flight mobile apps is to give you places to fly, destinations, things to do, and to support General Aviation. Now, with that, my guest tonight I'm so excited for. Robert Scratch Mitchell is a movie producer, an actor, an air show pilot based in Vancouver, British Columbia. He is as a retired third-generation fighter pilot with the Royal Canadian Air Force and a former team leader of the Canadian Forces Snowbirds Air Demonstration Squadron. Aviation is in his DNA. He grew up with stories of his grandfather flying Spitfires in Europe in World War II, and his father flew F-5s and T-33s, so he felt propelled to join the military. Blending his passions for aviation and the arts, Scratch's resume now includes being a character, a director, and a producer of the successful Discovery Channel series Airshow. Scratch is a film pilot and aerial coordinator and aerial director for film and TV. Let's bring him on the line now to join us here on Social Flight Live. Please help me welcome Robert Scratch Mitchell. How are you doing tonight?
Hey, Jeff, I'm very well. Thanks for having me.
I am so excited. I want to say first, thank you for getting up in the middle of the night to join us, because you are not here in the United States or North America for that matter. You're overseas. What's the story?
Well, it's like everything, there's a tale behind it. And so my family has a really cool opportunity to come live in Europe for a few years, and I'll be commuting back and forth for work and play. And so right now I'm actually sitting about 150 meters from the beach at Dunkirk. And we just came down here while we're waiting for our furniture to arrive. We're touring around Europe a little bit, and I've always been fascinated with the story of Dunkirk. And we took this opportunity, so it's kind of fitting that we're talking about aviation and film and everything that I've done in my background and my family, and get to chat about it a little bit here with you.
Yeah, so I mean that must be very powerful given your family's background. Tell me a little bit first about your personal history. I mentioned it very briefly during the introduction, but it must make something like Dunkirk very personal experience.
Yes, well, that's as a little guy, I grew up, hearing my grandfather talk about it, and like a lot of vets, didn't go into a lot of the details, but he always spoke of the fascination of flying Spitfire in his case. and the way he described flying in Europe, he was in North Africa, and then the latter part of the war, he was in France as they were sort of pushing through and flying Mark 9s, Mark 14s, and 16 Spitfires. And while he wasn't obviously involved in the operation here at Dunkirk in 1940, he's flown over these waters, and I couldn't help but reflect on looking up as I was in Europe over here and imagining him in the skies above me.
Wow, that's amazing. So with this family background, was it just were you always surrounded by it? What brought you through that path to the Canadian Forces, and tell me how you landed in the seat of that jet.
Well, that's it. It's just sort of was omnipresent, and growing up with a dad flying jets in the Royal Canadian Air Force, I used to hear the jets flying over. I remember him walking in the door at the end of workday, in a flight suit, and sometimes away on a deployment, comes back, gives me a model to build of a jet and whatnot. So it was just always there. And I think I used to build RC airplanes, and everything I imagined was about flying. And so it wasn't a real leap for me to want to go in the Air Force. Of course, as I'm experiencing now with a teenage son, there were a couple of years there where I was sort of rejected the idea and sort of pushed against, the father or what have you. And I think it was in my first year of university, sitting down with dad and sitting on I think the kitchen counter, and said, tell me about this Air Force stuff again. And I think I went down to the recruiting center that same week, and the rest is my history anyways.
Wow, that's amazing. Did you get to, see the aircraft that he was flying at the time when you were a kid?
With him flying it, you mean?
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily go in, but I mean, you must have been right up close and personal with the aircraft that he was flying.
I was, and I was old enough that I could appreciate it, and certainly in the latter years of him flying. And so I remember him specifically, watching him fly in formation with T-33s at an event in North Bay, Ontario. And I remember, um, recognizing, which position he was in the formation, and feeling pretty proud about that, right? When you're standing around, you're kind of thinking, hey, that's my dad up there. So it definitely left a lasting impression as a boy.
Oh, that's got to be so amazing. Did you learn to fly in the general aviation world, or was it directly with the RCAF?
It was, and surprisingly, we moved around a lot, and uh, I didn't really get involved in general aviation. And I think because I went right from high school into university, I didn't have a period much between that and joining the Air Force. I actually joined the Air Force while I was in university, and I just continued on in the Air Force. And so I was initiated into that early in the Air Force sense. And I think before I went down to boot camp, I said, I better go figure out what I'm getting into here. And I went and took about 5 or 6 flying lessons at the local Victoria, British Columbia flying club. And I was like, oh, what's this all about? This stuff. And I was like, okay, sort of makes sense. Okay, I think I'm doing the right thing, because I imagined that's what I was able to do, but one never really knows, right? To get up there, and it met my expectations.
That's awesome. So tell me then, how does someone without coming in, you imagine that the people that are at that level of making it as you did, the Snowbirds, everything that you've accomplished there, that going into the Air Force, that you would have to come with a leg up on everything, like already have ratings, already have all this. How did you push through all of that to then essentially be top of everything by getting into those positions?
Well, I think there's always a healthy amount of luck involved in life. I like to think that how you create your own luck a little bit, but I think I was also blessed that I had some skills, and I think some of my understanding of aviation through RC flying may have helped me a little bit. I had very good spatial awareness. I did gymnastics and I was involved in a lot of sports. And so I think I had a reasonable spatial awareness of things and up and down. I think that sort of looking back helped me a little bit, but you're right in the sense, as I was starting to go through pilot training, I was looking around the room and talking to guys that had commercial licenses, this and that. I'm like, oh my God. And on one hand, I could see where that helped some of the people going through. On the other hand, some of the instructors said is when you get a guy, in my case, a guy like me, with a clean slate, there really are no preconceived ideas how to do things. So I was easily taught through that system and formulated in what the military flying wanted at the time. And so that I think I didn't have any good or bad habits coming into the door, and I was a clean slate to be able to, to work with.
You're very, very teachable.
Yeah, I guess that's and it, thankfully for me, I had some aptitudes that worked out because, 4 or 5 flying lessons probably is not enough to truly assess if you have the aptitude for military flying, but I was fortunate in that case. It was.
So what was the first real jet that you were training in? Was it the T-33 at the time?
No, it was the Tudor. So that's the aircraft that the Snowbirds now use or continue to use, and they've subsequently moved on to flying with the Harbor 2, which is like the Texan 2, and then the Hawk, which is flown now in pilot training, the British Aerospace Hawk. And in my case, I graduated with my wings on the advanced course on the Tudor, and then I was selected for fighters as a pipeline in terms of, that's a term we used for if you go right into the pipeline of fighters right out of pilot training. I went and flew the F-5 right away and learned a sort of baby fighter pilot course on that.
Wow. Describe the Tudor to me. I'm not familiar with that particular aircraft.
Tudor, we used to often say it's like a T-37 on steroids. So it's a pressurized jet, has a little more thrust to weight, and it's a side seated aircraft. So it was very good as an instructional airplane because the instructor, there's lots of body language and lots of being present in the same cockpit aspects of training that works really well. And so that's, we used to say it was like a little European Boxster. It was so nimble and tight, and you just a 2-seater. They used to call it a classic 2-seater, and a Boxster type vehicle. If you compare that to like the F-18, which a little bit more of a Formula One car. And so the Tudor was a great little jet. And interestingly, I'm jumping ahead a little bit to the Snowbirds thing. I've been asked many times, what would be a really good Snowbird replacement airplane? I go, that little Tudor. It's a magnificent airplane. It's pretty hard to beat that. I would, break the molds out that and, put a wet wing in, and a little more updated engine and a glass cockpit. I think you'd have another 50-year airplane. Yeah.
That is very, very cool. So what became your favorite while you were serving, your favorite aircraft?
Well, I think it's hard not to say the F-18 just for the pure fact that the mission was extraordinary and the aircraft was extraordinary. And I started flying them. I was a baby. I was flying 23 years old. I was flying F-18s, and they still had a new car smell when I was flying them in the early mid 90s. And it was just extraordinary, all the sensors and everything that was going on. And it was an air-to-air interceptor, it was an air-to-ground fighter. It had so many capabilities, and I love that. I can say, however, that just purely flying a classic jet in the military, the F-5, I don't know what it was about that airplane. I just loved flying it. And something I came to really enjoy was low-level attack. And I got to see the transition in the 90s and late 90s from sort of that classic Cold War low-level attack into sort of medium-level precision-guided munitions attack. And the F-5 with that tiny little wing, it flew like just a razor knife going through the sky, and had very little effect. It was very little affected by turbulence, and so you could, even as a new student, the instructor would be always in the back saying, "Pick it up," because you just get so comfortable low and fast. 540 knots at 100 feet, you'd be down there and be like, "Pick it up," and it's just awesome. So in terms of a classic sort of Century Series fighter feel, the F5 was an awesome airplane. I loved it.
I've heard people say that they love the F5, and I have to say it puts a huge grin on my face with 500 plus knots at 100 feet.
Yeah, yeah,
That
it's
must be.
crazy.
So then,
It's hard.
so that led at some point to the Snowbirds. Tell me how that evolved.
Well, this was an interesting evolution. I remember being a kid and going to air shows, and I remember seeing the Blue Angels specifically, and in the F4s, and later the A7s, and then later the F-18s, and then the Snowbirds a number of times. And I remember thinking, that's a pretty cool thing. And so I've always, even as a kid, it was enjoyed that. I was, number one goal was become a fighter pilot when I joined. I said, once I get that done, then we'll see what happens. But I really enjoyed being a fighter pilot. But something happened in my fighter pilot career. I was given a choice. Interestingly, as I'm, traveling through Germany and Netherlands here, I was given the choice of potentially getting the last F4 exchange with Germany, or becoming the F-18 airshow pilot for Canada. I was like, dang, that's a really tough one, because I would really wanted to fly the F4 again, like flying this crazy Century Series, crazy locomotive in the sky. But then I really wanted to do the CF-18 airshow act around North America. And so ultimately I settled on the airshow, and I found that something I didn't know about myself, there was a performer in me. And flying the air show and being able to share the story, tell the story of being a fighter pilot and the Air Force, and what it's like just to fly an airplane like that to hundreds of thousands of people and meeting people everywhere at all these shows, it really invigorated me. And so I wasn't even done my tour as the F-18 airshow pilot. I put my name in for the Snowbirds for a tryout. And it concreted that curiosity that I had earlier on. And I said, no, this is definitely something I wanted to do. As much as I was, fangs and horns fighter pilot, I was, that air demonstration really invigorated me.
That's fascinating. So you went your entire life without necessarily tapping in to the kind of I want to be out there in front of people, and in that other level. You discovered that really during the airshow side.
Yeah, it really was. And it was very palpable for me. And I remember, having some real interesting moments. I had, a couple scares as an F-18 demo bus, maybe one scare where I had a malfunction in the airplane and got a little close to the ground. And it was a fuel transfer issue and a CFG issue, and I had to pull out of the square loop early, and the airplane didn't want to do that very well. And it became a very real experience for me. But also, I think one of the most powerful moments of my life, my career, is I remember my very first air show at the Ottawa Air Show, which is our national capital and our national headquarters. And I was taking getting in the jet to go do this very first performance. And I remember the butterflies. I'm thinking, man, what's going on here? I've never felt this in an airplane before. And, and all the generals are watching the politicians. And oh, by the way, my now wife, then fiance, was there with her family because they're from the region. And I started realizing there was all this pressure on me right there to not mess it up. And I remember this going through the checks a few times. And then I finally took the runway and I lit those afterburners. I felt the click, click, and then felt it go. And I felt this unbelievable rush of confidence and engagement and presence. And I think it was, to this day, it was probably my best performance ever. I felt fully connected to myself and the jet. And I was like, I really like this. And I like being able to push myself while being assessed and observed and performing. And yes, and so it did engage something in me.
Oh, that is so. And so there's a difference, of course, between the side of performing, as you just mentioned yourself, versus a team. So tell me about how that transitioned to the Snowbirds.
Yeah, so that's a great question, because that's people always ask me, what do you prefer more, being a solo performer or being a team performer? Because I've done both several times. Part of the Patriots jet team for 7 years, and I've been a solo F-86 pilot and now a solo T-33 pilot, and it's a real hard thing to say. Some of it translates for sure. I love the performing aspect. I love being able to get out of the jet, walk up to the fence line and greet, the girls and boys and the folks at the show, and feel that energy and share that energy, that adrenaline that I've just experienced. Love that. That part stays the same. There's something unique about being on a team and being so inexorably connected in the air, to the point you can almost sense what each other are going to do without even radio calls. You get that connected, and as everyone knows, we're flying as close as 4 feet to each other, and so the level of trust, it's almost cliche to say, there's implicit trust between you, but there is something beyond that I'd experienced before. And I was a lucky enough guy to represent Canada at a national level in some sporting, and it didn't compare to what I felt on the Snowbirds, that level of trust and connection, because the stakes are higher, perhaps. And I think for me personally, that level of being connected to myself and the jet, and then sharing that with a level of connection with everyone else on the team, sort of pushed it to a new level. So I found that to be equally as engaging for myself.
Wow, I'm going to show that picture because I love the Snowbirds. It's just so elegant. It's a beautiful performance.
Well, I of course I'm biased. I think so as well. And when I first joined the Snowbirds, I was 29, but I joined the Snowbirds and turning 30, and so I was still kind of, fighter pilot guy. And they used to say, "Oh, you guys are like an aerial ballet." I used to get slightly offended by that. And as I flew the Snowbirds more and more, I go, "You're absolutely right. That's exactly what we are. We're trying to put on a ballet, and with moments of intensity and moments of grace and joy mixed in." And so that's, what I like to think the Snowbirds are. And so when I came back as the commander of the team, that's exactly, I would say, we are a high energy aerial ballet. That's exactly what it is.
Tell me about the aircraft that you flew for that.
The Tudor, the Snowbird Tudor jet.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that is the same aircraft that was used for pilot training for many years, and that they've been, uniquely adapted for the Snowbirds. You can sit in either seat. The dual controls, as all the Tudors were, but they're configured so you can be a PIC in the right seat or left seat. And if it's a great picture to have up, because if you imagine it, if you're on the left side of the formation, you really want to be sitting in the right seat so that you're close to the other aircraft you're referencing. And likewise, on the right side of the formation, you're sitting in the left seat.
So
And
they're
so
not
that's,
powered. They're not powered differently than the originals that you flew.
no, the tanks underneath, which could be used for fuel, extended range tanks, in the sort of the school version of the jet, those are fitted with smaller tanks, but they're smoke oil tanks. And so there's a smoke system. As you can see, there's smoke that comes out the back, and then some cockpit differences and gear handle differences. But effectively, it's the same airplane that was used for the school.
Wow, that's really amazing. And one of the things I always find fantastic about those performances is how many aircraft have to be coordinated in order to do it. The size of the team seems to dictate even more coordination.
Yes, and as I've done, I'd coached quite a few aerobatic teams and formation teams even now, and I'm one of the airshow evaluators for formations, large formations, and I say that you go 2 airplanes is formation, obviously. Doubling it to 4 is not just a linear scale. It goes up exponentially, the complexity. You start adding airplanes beyond that, and the scale, the curve just keeps going up. And so going from 4 to 9, there's just so many moving parts in the sky and deconfliction that it takes a lot. We'll have done, I can't remember the exact number, but hundreds of training missions before you even hit the season. And a lot of it's just sorting out the deconfliction and the synchronizing of all the airplanes, because in some ways, the easy part is staying together once you learn how to do it. It's when everybody splits apart and comes back together, it gets very
Yeah,
complicated. And
I remember years ago taking some formation training, and it is all those joins are really something to learn.
mm-hmm. Well, and particularly when you have to deconflict 8 other airplanes, and who's coming in first, and from below, outside, inside. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
That must be unbelievable. So tell me the transition that happened from that to as you started to evolve towards your, I guess I'll call it your second professional career or phase.
Well, yes, that I was maybe guilty of my own success. I never thought I'd make it past lieutenant, and as I just kept going, and I think this is one of my sort of mantras for life, as you keep sticking to things you truly enjoy, you can't help but to show people you enjoy that, and if you and they recognize that, they want to sort of propel that path for you. And so I found myself as a lieutenant colonel coming out of the Snowbirds as the second time as the commander of the team, and put on a selection path to go become a general effectively. And I'll call this deep select thing, where they were picking a bunch of people in the Air Force and saying, okay, we're going to groom a few of you to become generals, and one day one of you will run the Air Force, kind of thing. And it was a distinguished list. I wasn't one of the only ones. There was several of us picked, but I was very flattered. I was sent off to staff college and a bunch of training and extra language training. In Canada, you have to be fully bilingual to be a general, and again, sort of a victim of my own success. I enjoyed what I was doing so much that I think I did well at it, and it promoted me out of the cockpit effectively. I was never really going to fly airplanes again. I was slated to become a base commander, and at the same time, I was a really avid surfer. I did my staff college in Australia, and I was surfing a lot. I was actually voted the guy that had the most fun on staff college there. I managed 40 years of surfing 1 year. And I was sitting on a surfboard in Coolangatta on one of our breaks, and I was thinking about all the TV productions that I've been involved in over the years as a performer, and I had some ideas for a TV show, and I'm like, I wonder. And one of the things, Jeff, I used to say to all the school visits and everything, I almost sound a cliche. I would come in and talk about, biting into your dreams and really engaging with what truly makes you tick. And I think I served that more than just the lip service of it. But I started questioning myself. I'm like, you kind of suck. You're not going to fly airplanes in the Air Force anymore, and you're kind of going down a path that you've never really described to yourself. And you've always been interested in filmmaking as a child as well. And I'm like, you know what? I've got this idea that you can't let go of. So I put my release in at 20 years on the cusp of effectively being a general, and went out and created a TV show.
Wow. So tell me more about this, because you don't, obviously the average person doesn't just quote create a TV show, but you're not the average person. So how did you put this together?
Well, this is when I was on the Snowbirds the very first time, I met a gentleman, Mark Miller, who was a prolific TV producer and an aviator. And he came out and did a documentary on the Snowbirds. And we had kept in touch over the years. And we met at the ICAST convention, the Airshow convention, sort of the year of my release. And I said, hey, I'm working, with a couple other people I'd done some productions with and running these ideas past them. And I said, I'm really interested in developing this TV series. He says, he almost went white and he goes, I'm thinking of doing something very similar. That's why I'm here at the Airshow convention. Because my TV series was centered around the airshow industry. And he says, well, we need to talk. And so he was a real producer. I was just a guy with an idea at the time. And with more ambition than education in that world. And so partnered with him, and he ushered this project to Discovery Canada. And ultimately, this show was green-lit, as they say. And we went from idea to shooting this thing in just a matter of a year. And shot it over a couple of years, aired it in 2015. And I think it went into 25, 35 different countries, not the United States for whatever reason. There was some crazy, this is the stuff I'm learning now as a producer, is there's not only politics, there's all sorts of contractual things. And so we never got the show aired down south where I really wanted it to air. And, the rest is history in that sense. I learned from the fire hose of TV producing because I ultimately trained as a director on it. And oh, by the way, I was one of the characters in it. So I wore a lot of hats. I was a busy cat for 2 or 3 years. So that's really how it is. But I will say that one of the worst things that can happen to a producer is first time success, because I thought, well, you have a great idea and you just got to go talk to the right people, and the next thing you know, you're going to make this. But it doesn't work that way. It was we caught lightning in a bottle at the early stages of this, and away it went.
Oh man, that I'll tell you, a lot of people, including myself, are going to be searching for that. Even though we are in the U.S., there's got to be a way to get it.
There must be. I think I've seen some stuff on YouTube, and I know iTunes had it at one point. So yes.
Discovery Canada certainly has a track record and a history of aviation shows to some degree. There's been some good ones that have been out there, and so that must have been an amazing 2 to 3 years of learning so many different things. Now you're transitioning, and not only you're doing the airshow stuff, but producing, learning how to act in it, and all those other things. What was the process of coming up with that kind of script, of making that thing happen?
Well, this was where I learned to trust my instincts, even though I had, I would say, a little bit of imposter syndrome starting into it, because a lot of people would turn to me, these veteran filmmakers and cinematographers that we're working with, because we had multiple crews, working all over the country and North America, as we were following some acts in the U.S. as well with the Patriots, and looking for story ideas and the day-to-day running of things. And I learned that humans are innately storytellers. We just have that. And I think if you figure how to tap into your own ability to tell a story, and if you're an expert on your field that you're discussing, then you can frame that in the right ways. And so I was able to figure that out early on. I think the challenge is for people that aren't experts in other things is how to tell a story about someone else. And that's what I've had to learn after the Airshow series. I've learned to tell other people's stories or other field stories, because stories are stories at the end of the day, and story structure. And when I've done an incredible amount of study formally and practically about storytelling, but to start in my own field, I really knew what the stories were. And then I learned how to tell them within the construct of the airshow industry. But at the same time, I know everyone was sort of turning to me when the main producer wasn't there. And so you have to come up with an answer. And so, okay, what's the other term? If not that, it's fake it till you make it, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. So you mentioned the Patriots. Let me bring that up here. So tell me about the Patriots.
Yes, this was all part of this decision as well. As I mentioned, I was not going to be flying airplanes in any appreciable way, perhaps a little bit as a wing commander, base commander. And other than that, I was never going to fly jets again. So about the time I was considering getting out, I knew a couple of the guys on the team. And in fact, we had, as the commander of the Snowbirds, I hosted the Patriots in Comox during our training camp because they were trying to grow from 4 to 6 jets and they were trying to understand large formations. And they said, can we come up and hang with you guys for a few days and just see how you do things? I said, yeah, sure, come on up. If there's a way we can help you guys, I think that's great. And they flew with us and they did our briefs and debriefs. Well, circle back a couple years later, they phoned me up and they said, you remember that conversation about us going to 6 ships? They said, well, we have a spot open if you're interested. I was like, dang it, now I'm going to be able to fly jets still, and I'm thinking about getting out. So that sweetened the deal for me to get out of the Air Force, because I could go fly. And in many ways, when you're particularly a jet formation guy, like where do you use those skills in life? You never get to really do that again. And so this was the one unique, rare opportunity to keep doing that because I loved being a jet formation pilot. And so I said yes, of course, and jumped on board with the team for the next 7 years. Yeah.
So you got to do that at the same time as as you were producing, or was that part of Airshow?
It was. So the jet team was brought into the TV series. And so there were times I had to take one hat off and say, okay, I'm no longer producer scratch or director scratch. I'm now talent scratch, you know, being a character in this thing. I had to do that.
So did you create your own reality TV drama?
No, the one thing I can say, and for the most part, you know, we've held really true to observational documentaries, the technical term, where you just let it play out and cameras follow the story naturally. And so if you have good camera operators and good directors, they'll see the story. They don't need to say, hey, can you go throw a wrench at that guy because you don't have anything going on. It's like, I'm not flying your jet today.
No rigged pre-flights. Who put this can
No,
of beans in the intake?
yeah, no, we avoided that to try to keep some authenticity to it. Yeah, we got accused of it, of course, like everyone, but really it was largely
Perhaps a little of the
observation.
subtle dignity of the Canadians that you kept that a little more civil.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
So, okay, so the series came out that we're all going to search for, and now you've transitioned that into an entire career of acting and all sorts of things with aerial videography. So tell me more that transitions into where you are now and where you're going.
Well, and it was part of that transition, and I would say that I was also, you know, I think I mentioned, you know, that the air show flying really invigorated me as a performer to the point that I was thinking, okay, I enjoyed being in front of the camera on the series. I enjoyed it on the documentaries. I was part of when I was in the military. I'm going to explore this a little bit. So while I was even in the Air Force, I joined some local theater groups and I did some plays, and I just sort of found a new part of myself I never knew as a performer. And because I enjoyed public speaking, and I learned that that was in effect a form of performing. And I said, okay, I'll take that to another level. And I took some formal acting training, in fact, years of it, and worked with some of the, you know, the greatest acting coaches in Vancouver in the end when I moved there. And I thought, okay, maybe we'll just see where fate takes me. Well, something interesting happened along the way of doing the Airshow series and then working on a few other series. I would say that if I was to say that the acting part of my experience base was the pure creative and the producing was the pure pragmatic. So if we go right brain and left brain on things, well, I found that directing was the marriage of the two. You had to creatively focus things. And so in the end, I never even thought about directing once in my life Before this, even during this, I was sort of doing some of the directing in the Airshow series on the other characters, not when I was part of the team. That something interesting here, much like that surprise I had when I strapped on the F-18 in front of an airshow for the first time. Being a director for the first time was a big surprise to me, something I really enjoyed. So I would say that's my favorite part of it. Certainly groveling for money and financial plans and all the business and show business is not my favorite thing. It's a necessary evil, and some people love it. I do love the pure creative, but I think because I'm a left-right brain kind of person, I love the directing aspect of it. And so I've been pushing my career more that way. And that's allowed me to branch out into things like other TV shows or movies where they hire me to come and direct the flying scenes or choreograph the flying scenes. I get to use, the pragmatic of putting the flying scenes safely together, but at the same time, putting a little creative twist on it, interpreting the script, approaching the director of the film or TV show and saying, here's how I see this coming together. What are your thoughts? And they go, I like that. Can you just direct this for me? And I'm like, yes, I certainly can.
I assume that means that there's a little more reality in if we look at any of the films and programs that you're directly involved in. As pilots, of course, right? We lose that suspension of disbelief that's required for all actors and all performances for a viewer to have. It's hard for us as pilots, of course, to keep that suspension of disbelief when things get a little wacky in who's producing stuff. But I imagine folks like you, who are when you're directing something, it's going to be a little more realistic for the rest of us.
I sure hope so, and that's one of my real goals and what I sort of pushed myself to when I'm on. I said, within the constraints of the budget and everything else, how real can I make this feel? And in the realm of the preposterous to the banal, what's the right needle in there to keep it entertaining and yet authentic? And so that's what I do challenge myself with. And you will have very, not heated, but very serious creative discussions about that, where the needle is on the preposterous scale to the banal scale. And because, yeah, you could go shoot a really accurate, boring thing, or on the other side, you can shoot a really preposterous thing that people just gauge. Because I remember being a kid, maybe perhaps because I sort of had some affinity to aviation, I recognized those shows in the 80s when they took off in one airplane and a different airplane landed. I'm like, wait a minute, that's not right. So like at very least, if I could solve that piece, I'm like, I'll challenge myself to that. And that's what I've found. But I've also, I think, as much as their creative differences, sometimes when you really approach a director or a production about it and you say, here's where I think I can create this, and it's always I think the line in Hollywood is always it's not so much a no, can't do this. It's no, but here's a solution for you, or have you thought about this? And so I always try to do the old make them think it's their idea trick. And sometimes I think one of the greatest projects I've worked on was the Midway film with Roland Emmerich, and I think going into it, he's known for his post-apocalyptic big thrillers and spaceships and everything else. So I knew that we were going to be challenged. And the other aspect of it was he made a clear decision early that there was going to be no practical flying, because the intensity that he wanted was going to demand more out of the airplanes and these precious old warbirds than we could probably give. And so the challenge was, how do we make it authentic as much as we can in a CG environment? So as you see the pictures come up, it was very elaborate gimbal systems and the latest, absolutely latest, they call them technocranes, that extension arm that you see there, and with a special head on it that moved in multiple axes to create a flow. And I think a lot of your viewers and yourself would attest to the fact that when we see CG aircraft, there's something wrong with it. And often what it is the weight of the airplane going through the sky is wrong. It's too nimble, or it's just doesn't have that sort of presence in the sky that we all know aviation to be. And that was one of the challenges I sort of put out for myself, working with the CG team and the camera operators, and all, just to really create this sense of weight in the sky and movement. And I think we achieved that largely in Midway, because that's it's a CG movie for sure. But I think given some of the other sort of warbird kind of CG movies that didn't do that, you can really notice it. And my argument to some directors are like, wow, only aviation nerds will know that. I'm like, wow, you'd be surprised. People are so smart now, and whether they know it or not, there's a thing, we call it cognitive dissonance, where your brain disconnects from what you're seeing. And I would argue that with really bad CG flight modeling, that even the uninitiated in aviation, their brain will say, that's not what I think it should look like. And they won't even know why that the scene doesn't feel right. And so I think more and more people want that authenticity as well, because I think they know the viewer will just appreciate it whether they know it or not.
I think that makes I think that's true. I think that makes a lot of sense. Obviously, that people just inherently know, even if it's a car. I mean, you look back at old movies and you're like, that's so you can tell there's something. I like the term cognitive dissonance of viewing that and knowing that something's wrong. And if there's something that you can bring to the production to make that happen, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Well, and given this was a large blockbuster budget film, and Roland Emmerich is known for his, eye-watering effects and visual stimulation on the screen. That's what he does well. Every once in a while we'd have a creative discussion about things, and he would just turn to me. He goes, he's a German Austrian. He goes, "Scratch! I am not making a documentary. I'm making, And so I'd be like, okay. And so I picked my battle, right? And I was like, and I would say, this one is a bit egregious. And and won some, didn't win others, but I could sit back and say, in the collective whole, I think I could be proud of that, working in a Hollywood medium, because we are not doing a documentary, we're doing entertainment to entertain everyone. That it met my level of expectation.
I think that's really, really important. It does, it has to do with that believability. It has to do with the comfort and immersion that the audience brings and is able to do that. I think when you have that with a movie, you can relax a little more and get involved in it a little more without something kind of screaming at you that you're sitting in a theater. That is an example. Of course, that's one of the things that we've been hearing so many positive things, and that I saw in even the latest Top Gun movie. Tom Cruise obviously is a pilot, cares about those things to some degree, and has brought at least some degree of reality in the scenes, at least some that help you over the edge.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned Top Gun. I get a little bit of a tick because I was in the running to do some work on that film, right? And I won't even call it my consolation prize to work on Midway, because they were shot around the same time. Just Top Gun the Midway came out just before the pandemic, if you remember, and got in that window. And then Top Gun was planned to be released and delayed a couple of years, obviously. And well, I would have loved to have worked on Top Gun, and to your point, I truly respected a lot of the practical flying they did achieve there. And by the way, I saw in my old alma mater, a lot of the Patriots guys were doing some of the behind the scenes flying, and the Cinejet's a Patriots jet, of course. And so I was really happy to see the team get that sort of recognition and what have you. But interestingly, I was talking about how everything relates, right? Everything in life, you just keep stitching all the things you love together. And I mentioned that the directing is more energizing for me. As much as I love, choreographing a scene, being an aerial coordinator, being the safety pilot, or what have you, my career path is definitely going more creative producing and directing, but that's what Midway gave me. So in many ways, not working on Top Gun opened up this door for me in, and Roland Emmerich was so generous. He gave me a lot of creative control, and may I say, uncredited, unofficially, I worked with him. Of course, he was the main director, but helped direct a lot of the scenes with the actors. And, you talk about the different pieces of life. I did all that acting training. I know how actors think, and I was able to train at a very high level, and I worked with some amazing actors. And there were just a few scenes where early on where the actor was just trying to connect with a different aspect of the scene, and I would just throw a little suggestion out, to the point where Roland, once in a while, you would just hand me the director's mic and say, "You do this scene," and little old me'd walk out in front of 180 people on set and kind of do, and then that led to directing more and more sequences, and that's where my career is going anyways. And so gave me the confidence that I could handle a big set when it's my movie. Yeah.
That is so, so cool. What a wonderful evolution to do that. And then one of the other things that you sent me is the work that you're doing to change the way some things can be filmed. And that includes this aircraft here.
Yeah, so this is the new project, right? So this is the one of Greg Collier's Ace Maker T-33s, and I've been, very fortunate. He approached me a couple years ago, and I flew for him for a couple seasons, just half a dozen shows, just to enjoy and getting back in a solo act in jet. Just loved it. And this is an ex-RCF jet that I was flying, and so I had some affinity to it. And my dad, I saw him flying T-33s, and he quite likely flew this one, and so I was pretty keen to do that and fly the jet with him. Coming out of COVID and everything, I had been developing something in a couple projects up here in Canada. One of them is really exciting. We're approaching the 100th anniversary of the Royal Canadian Air Force. An organization approached me and said, "Hey, we know you're involved in this other project that relates with the RCAF. Could you consider expanding it to a 100th anniversary documentary?" And I said, that would be really interesting, just to add money. And working with an organization that's helping the fundraising and the sponsorship for this. We're not there yet, but it's really encouraging. And as we've had some generous inputs already, and it's allowed me to develop this platform and modify it to a film platform. And so to be able to fly with fighters and whatnot, I want to be able to go 400 knots, I want to be able to do 5G. And so we're working with a company at GSS, and that have a really high level cutting edge aerial gimbal system. And it's a ball system, so it doesn't matter where it's turned. And look, it presents the same aerodynamic forces. And so we've adapted one for the jet and some other camera mounts that are to be announced. And put a bit of a Canadian livery on it. If you see the classic, the Ace Maker stripe with the yellow stripe on the fuselage there, putting the film strip on it, and branding it in this way for a couple years while we're shooting these projects. And then I'll keep it for other projects. But for me, if you can own the capability, you're going to be able to make it more affordable. That's really the main motivation for this. And then obviously I'll be doing some commercial work with it as well. But the main motivation is to service my own films. Basically, if I can do it at half the cost, if I own the capability effectively.
Right.
I don't own the jet. I'm leasing the jet for a couple of years.
That must be something that people don't normally think about the challenges of being able to film high quality air to air, at that kind of speed.
Well, and that's it. It's it's a very capable airplane. There's a reason T-33s were used by, I don't know, 50 different air forces for 50 years. It was and is a dependable airframe. It's still the fastest straight wing jet ever designed, 505 knots. This jet would go, and it'll go there. That's
Wow.
you know, there's a lot of other airplanes that say it can go such and such speed, but you know, you have to be full power in a dive. This airplane, though, once you get it up on step, it'll sit at 400 knots and stay there all day.
That's amazing. That's
Yeah.
that's amazing. So a couple other photos before we let you go that just kind of put some of these things together to have you take us through. Everyone can see these photos. You've got take me through a couple of these.
Right, so there's, well, Snowbird lead up in the top corner. The top right corner is the livery that my F-18 was in during the CF-18 demo year. And Patriots bottom left, you know, Snowbird's the right, T-Bird, that's the ace maker, without the livery we just saw that I've been flying. But the one bottom center, this airplane I got to fly for a little while, and at the Vintage Wings Flying Museum at Gatineau, Quebec, in Canada, and it was a Golden Hawk Sabre,
I was gonna
and
say,
those,
I thought that was a
and
Sabre. That
yeah, and that was an amazing airplane to fly. And it's, again, I'm going to sound almost cliche saying, you know, hands down, just as an airplane to fly, that's been my favorite airplane to physically get in and fly. Of course, I love the mission with the F-18 and everything else, but I don't think there's an airplane or a jet that I've ever got in and felt so connected to so quickly. And I even say it to people to the point where, you know, trip 2 or 3, I was doing rollover aerobatics and thing, like I'd flown it all my life. It talked to me so well on those first 2 trips, and to the point I was like, okay, what am I missing here? And such a great airplane. Yeah, love
I had
that.
always thought that the FA-6 Sabre was a difficult plane to fly. Is that not the case?
I didn't find it that way. You know, there's a couple corners that'll bite you. It's, you
Yeah.
know, it's not as friendly as the T-33 or the Tudor, but when you know those and you're mindful of those ones, I don't know, I found that airplane just settled into everything I wanted it to do.
Isn't that cool? And then tell me about this.
Right, so that's, you know, before the T-33 and whatnot, I did work with Wolf Air for a couple of years. Did flying all over North and someplace South America, filming airliners and different commercial projects, working with this. It's an internal camera system with periscopes, and so this just happened to be an Air Canada commercial. We were filming up in the Pacific Northwest, and very rewarding being around these big airliners, you know, bringing me back to sort of my air-to-air refueling days and making pretty pictures. And so it's fun to get on airplanes when you see the images that you and the team, you know, the cinematographers in the back and the other pilot I flew with, which was Kevin LaRosa. We flew together for years with, it was you know, the main guy with Top Gun, right? And
Oh,
so he taught me a lot about this kind of flying and making pretty pictures with it. So very cool chapter.
that is so wonderful. Well, Scratch, thank you so much for joining us here on Social Flight Live. I know it is late where you are, but we're all grateful to hear your amazing story and how it's taken you through so many different phases, but always kind of in this kind of upward mobile and wandering path towards greatness. It's very impressive.
Well, it's all, this stuff's supposed to be fun in life, right? And still smiling every day, so that's the goal.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much again, and I appreciate you coming on Social Flight Live.
No, my pleasure. It was an honor. Thank you much.
Thanks. And to all of you, thank you as always for taking time out of your evening to join us here on Social Flight Live as well. We sincerely appreciate it, and we're here to support you and General Aviation. We'll be back next week with Beech 18 Airshow pilot and freight dog enthusiast Matt Yunkin, and he and his family stories are absolutely wonderful. I definitely encourage you to join us here next Tuesday, July 19th at 8 p.m. Then we are off for the week of Oshkosh. We'll be producing videos from the event at AirVenture. And again, if you are there at the show, find us and you may snag some swag here from Social Flight. Always a fun time. Following that, on Tuesday, August 2nd, Flight Helmet CEO GM Bell is going to be joining us. It's so cool. He has a complete museum, probably one of the only ones dedicated to flight helmets. We'll answer all sorts of questions having to do with that. We're here on August 9th with Aaron Fitzgerald of with helicopter aerobatics, which is, again, a genre completely unto itself. And on the 16th, legendary NASA flight director and experimental aircraft builder and writer, Paul Dye, will be here on Social Flight Live. Until next time, I wish you all blue skies.